Let me fast forward to those bad old days, which are still, unfortunately, too often with us, I think, and go to the issue of the misogyny column, because that tells you the state of journalism today. This was actually my third column that I had written about the sexist media treatment of Senator Clinton. I wrote the first one in October of 2007. By October of 2007, there had already been a week-long discussion of cleavage gate. There had already been a debate in which John Edwards and Barack Obama discussed whether or not they liked her jacket. And there had been several other incidents that had occurred by October of 2007. Now, why do I raise this? Because when the Misogyny I Won't Miss column ran and created an international sensation, by the way, I got well over 10,000 emails from around the world that came from places as far away as Bangladesh and Bosnia and Indonesia and Australia. And I'm sounding a little like Howard Dean right now, but it was enormous. Not only was the outpouring that I got enormous, but I am told by a colleague at the Washington Post that my column got more hits in 72 hours. It was the leading hit on the Washington Post website for 72 hours. That is almost unprecedented. There's obviously things that everyone, the Walter Reed scandal, that wonderful piece of journalism, that type of thing is going to get a lot of hits. But for an opinion piece, this was no routine column. Now, after this tremendous outpouring, I was asked to be on many, many shows. And I did McNeil Lehrer and Judy Woodruff. Ruth Marcus from the Washington Post was also on that day, and she was of the opinion that there had been no sexism, or very little sexism, or that sexism hadn't made a difference. In any case, she was very much the optimist, and I was very much what I would consider the realist. But the following Sunday, the column appeared in the Washington Post, I think it was on a Thursday. The following Sunday, Meet the Press devoted a segment to the issue of, has the press been sexist toward Hillary Clinton? I happen to have known Tim Russert from the time that he worked for Mario Cuomo in Albany. He was a politician then, he was a politician's aide. I was a reporter in Albany. So I knew Tim Russert for 30 years by the time this column appeared in the Washington Post. So when the good producers at NBC decided they would do a roundtable on whether sexism in the media, there had been this firestorm. This column had been everywhere. It had been around the world. It had been to Bangladesh. It was on everybody's lips. And when they put together their panel to discuss on Meet the Press whether the media had been sexist, I was not asked to appear on that show. However, my column, I'm told, was widely discussed. My name was mentioned and my column was mentioned, and the shorthand for that column, which is something I think, Carol, one of the things we have to fight against is the simple shoddiness of the journalism that's going on. Because if you or I, when we were building our careers, did the kind of journalism that's acceptable now, I don't care who you are, male, female, black, white, purple, we would never have survived the newsroom if we did the kind of journalism that's accepted now. The shorthand for this column, the column, by the way, never said, I've been a political reporter for 30 years, the column never said this is why Clinton lost. You heard the excerpts from the column that addressed how did it impact the campaign. You might suggest it had some effect. I used very coded, diffuse language on purpose because as a political reporter, I frankly could see all the problems in Senator Clinton's campaign from very early on. And so I didn't want to say in the column that this is why she lost. The shorthand, though, in the press, and particularly in the cable television press, was Hillary Clinton is charging that this is why she lost. Well, Hillary Clinton never charged that. Marie Cocco never charged that. As far as I know, nobody ever charged that. What we were doing was pointing out that it was offensive, that it was wrong, that it was biased, that it was frankly disgraceful, and some of the stuff was just absolutely hateful. And as I said on McNeil Lehrer, I would punish my teenage sons for some of the language and some of the comments that were made openly on national television. But I think we're facing a very critical moment, and I'll tell you why. As you all know, the media is changing very rapidly. There are no more, now if you took a maternity leave at Newsday, you would probably come back and find out you've been downsized while you were gone. The Washington Post just bought out 150 people. Why is this a critical moment for women? Because when Carol and I came into the business, we were the first generation of women who tried to do something other than write for the food section. And what we were told is that we couldn't be editors yet because first you had to do night cops, then you had to do local politics, then you had to cover sewer commissions. Believe me, I've covered a lot of sewer commissions. Then you had to cover Albany, then you had to cover Washington, then you had to basically, as you do in many professions, you had to build a portfolio. Now our portfolio, of course, had to be bigger and better and longer and, just all around better than the guy sitting next to us. But you were told you had to build a career, and then 20 years down the road, or 25 years down the road, maybe you too could be a news director, or you too could be the business editor of a major newspaper, or you too could be the metropolitan editor. And in fact, what's happening now, with the shrinkage in the industry, and it's affecting newspapers in particular, but it's also affecting the broadcast networks, this generation of women who are in their late 40s, early 50s, early 60s, the age when men get to be editor of the newspaper, we're being downsized. And, our male colleagues are also being downsized, but there's a difference. I mean, somebody who just took over as editor, the woman who was the editor of the Chicago Tribune, one of the very few, I think you can count them on one hand, the number of women who are actually the chief editor of a major newspaper. She just resigned last week. And I noticed that the fellow who's taking over the editor's job is 58 years old. Well, that is prime downsize age. And if you're not in one of these positions that they think is critical, you are going to be downsized. So I think this is a very perilous moment, not only for women in media and how we're covered, why we're covered the way we are, but also because we are going to lose a generation of people who have struggled, as Carol and I did, to frankly make it in a man's world. There is nothing glamorous about, I was chuckling about Elizabeth Dole because I told somebody recently, I have stayed up all night with Bob Dole. And there's nothing glamorous about staying up all night with Bob Dole. But he was Senate Majority Leader, and the Senate goes all night long, and that's the way you sort of make your bones in journalism, is you do really dumb things, like have to stay up all night with Bob Dole. And we're all going to be gone. And I don't exactly know where we're going to go and how we're going to get the message out. It's tough enough when we do have positions that look glamorous, nationally syndicated columnists, when they're not running Ellen Goodman. So it's a very tough moment. I want to address the other issue that Carol mentioned. I took a note or two. Does it make a difference to have women on the op-ed page? I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. Some of you may have met Lily Ledbetter at this conference. Okay. I started my career in Washington by covering economic issues, taxes, the Reagan budgets, the Reagan tax cuts, and everything that basically has come after that economically. I want you to think for one moment, when that Supreme Court decision came down, I think it was last year, do you recall Robert Samuelson writing about the Lily Ledbetter wage decision? Do you recall Paul Krugman writing about it? Okay, I've just named the two top economic columnists in the country. Neither one of them wrote about this decision. I wrote about it right away.